The wolf came in on a Tuesday, which was already a bad day. Marin had been up since 4 dealing with a red-tailed hawk with a fractured wing and a raccoon that had decided the surgery prep table was a personal affront, and by the time her volunteer Marcus called from the intake bay saying you need to come see this, she was running on gas station coffee and the particular stubbornness of someone who had nowhere else to be. She came anyway. The wolf was enormous. That was the first thing, not the silver coat matted with blood along the left flank, not the size of the paws, not even the way it was breathing in the shallow, controlled way of an animal that was in serious pain and choosing not to show it. Just the sheer scale of it. Marin had worked with wolves before, had the bite scar on her left forearm to prove it, and none of them had looked like this. This animal was wrong in the way that fairy tales were wrong. Too large, too silver, too still. "Where did you find it?" she asked. "Highway 12 embankment," Marcus said. "Just off the Ashford exit. Someone called it in as a dog." The wolf turned its head and looked at her. Amber eyes. That was the second thing. Marin had seen a lot of animal eyes in 8 years of wildlife medicine, and animal eyes had a particular quality to them, present but not deliberate, aware but not calculating. These eyes were none of those things. These eyes were watching her the way a person watched someone they were deciding whether to trust. "Okay," she said, mostly to herself. She snapped on gloves. "Let's see what we're working with." The wound was a deep laceration along the left rib cage, not a vehicle strike, she decided quickly. The edges were too clean, more like something had caught him and he'd pulled free. 2 ribs were cracked. The left foreleg had a hairline fracture she found by touch, while the wolf held itself perfectly still in a way that was not natural, not animal, not anything she had a good category for. "You're going to need to let me sedate you," she told it. The wolf looked at her. "I know you don't want to. I wouldn't either." She kept her voice low, the way she always did with animals that were deciding whether she was safe. "But I can't set that leg properly while you're conscious, and you know it's broken, and we're both going to have a better night if you stop performing and let me help." A long pause. Then the wolf lowered its head onto its paws. Marcus made a sound behind her. "Don't," Marin said. "I wasn't going to say anything. You were going to say something about how that was weird. It was extremely weird. Everything out here is weird. Hand me the ketamine." She worked for 2 hours. The ribs she could brace but not set. She taped them with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this in worse conditions, in worse light, with worse tools. The leg fracture she splinted properly, which required a level of cooperation from the patient that she was going to spend significant time not thinking about later, because the wolf had adjusted its position twice at exactly the right moments, as if it understood what she was trying to do. Animals didn't do that. She told herself. Animals did that. By the time she had him stable, and it was a him, definitively, which she noted in the chart with professional detachment, it was past midnight. She set up the large recovery kennel in the back room, the one she used for the bigger animals, lined it with the good blankets because his temperature was lower than she liked, and sat on the floor next to it while she waited for the sedation to wear off enough that she was confident leaving him. The wolf slept. She watched his breathing even out, the shallow pain-controlled rhythm softening into something deeper, and found herself thinking about the eyes again. The amber, the deliberateness. "Stop it," she told herself. "It's a wolf. You've seen wolves." She hadn't seen this wolf. She left at 1 a.m, drove the 12 minutes back to her cabin, and was asleep before she'd finished deciding whether to be worried. She was back at 6. The kennel door was open. That was the first thing she registered. Not the pile of blankets, not the destroyed IV line on the floor, not even the draft coming from somewhere it shouldn't. Just the open kennel door, which had a latch she was certain she'd secured, and the empty interior, and the specific quality of silence that meant something large was no longer where she'd left it. Then, She registered the man. He was sitting on the surgery prep table, her surgery prep table, the one the raccoon had already violated, wrapped in one of her emergency thermal blankets with the comprehensive lack of self-consciousness of someone who had woken up in stranger situations than this and made his peace with it. Dark hair, a jaw that looked like it had opinions, amber eyes that were watching her from across the room with the same quality she'd catalogued the night before. Deliberate, calculating, deciding. Marin stood in the doorway. She looked at the empty kennel. She looked at the man. She looked at the tongue depressor splint she had made still strapped to his left forearm with medical tape, which was doing absolutely nothing for a human radius but had been perfectly sized for a wolf leg. The ribs, she said, because she was a medical professional and this was the most pressing clinical concern. You need to keep them taped. The man looked down at his forearm, then back at her. You're not going to ask, he said. His voice was low, not a question. I'm going to ask a lot of things, Marin said, in a specific order. First, are you in pain? Second, do you need water? Third, what is your name? Fourth, and I want you to really think about this one before you answer. Are there people looking for you? And are they going to show up at my rescue at an inconvenient hour? A pause. Yes, he said. No. Draven. And yes. She crossed the room, opened the supply cabinet, and handed him a water bottle. Drink that, she said. Then we're going to talk about the ribs. He took the water bottle. His hand was large enough that it looked faintly ridiculous, a detail she filed away in the part of her brain that was still functioning normally. Most people, he said, would be more alarmed. Most people, Marin said, pulling on fresh gloves, don't have a hawk, 3 foxes, a blind coyote, and whatever you are to deal with before 8 in the morning. She snapped the glove. I don't have the bandwidth for alarmed. Hold still. He held still, outside. The Montana morning was coming up gray and cold over the Ashford Hills, indifferent to the fact that the Alpha King of Valcrest was sitting on her prep table in a thermal blanket while a nobody wildlife medic checked his rib tape and tried very hard not to think about his eyes. She failed at the last part. She pressed on. Anyway, he didn't leave. That was the part Marin kept returning to while she did the morning rounds. The hawk, the foxes, the coyote named Gerald, who was blind and ancient and had been at the rescue longer than she had. Draven sat in the plastic chair outside the recovery room and watched her work with the focused stillness of an animal that had decided this was a safe place and was not yet ready to move on. She gave him a pair of sweatpants from the lost and found box. A flannel shirt that had belonged to a volunteer who'd quit in November. He put them on without comment, which told her either he was accustomed to being dressed by strangers or he'd had worse mornings than this, and somehow she suspected both were true. You need a doctor, she said, coming back with a fresh roll of medical tape. I have a doctor. A human doctor. For the ribs. I'll heal. She stopped. Looked at him. How fast! Something shifted in his face, not quite amusement, not quite surprise. The expression of a man who was not accustomed to being asked direct questions and was recalibrating. Faster than you, he said. That's not a number. 3 days. 4 for the leg. Marin considered this information with the same focused practicality she applied to everything. The tape stays on until the ribs feel solid, not just better. There's a difference. You'll be tempted to take it off too early. I won't. Everyone says that. I'm not everyone. She met his eyes. The amber was different in daylight, warmer, with a dark rim around the iris that she had no medical reason to have noticed. She looked back at the tape. No, she said. I don't imagine you are. His phone had appeared from somewhere. She didn't ask where. She had enough unanswered questions, and he'd been on it for 20 minutes in a low, controlled voice that she could hear from the other room but couldn't make out. When she came back through, he was staring at the wall with the expression of a man receiving information he'd already anticipated and still didn't want. Problem? she asked. Several. He set the phone down. I need to stay off the road for 48 hours. Marin set down the supply tray. Off the road. There are people looking for me. Not people I want to find me here. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, one of the foxes made a sound, a sharp, querulous bark, the noise they made when something felt wrong. Marin had learned to trust that noise. Are you dangerous? She asked. He looked at her directly. To you? No. That's a specific answer. You asked a specific question. She had. She picked up the supply tray and put it back on the shelf and stood at the window looking out at the gray Montana morning while she thought it through. She had a 2-bedroom cabin on the rescue property. She had a guest room that currently housed 3 boxes of medical supplies and a folding cot. She had, apparently, the Alpha King of Valcrest in her recovery room and his enemies on the highway, and she was 23 years old and had no pack and no rank and no one who would tell her what to do about any of this. That last part was, she decided, the only advantage she had. Guest room, she said. There's a cot. The supplies are in boxes, you'll have to move them. Bathrooms down the hall. She turned around. You pay for your own food. I'm not a hotel. He was looking at her with the expression she was starting to recognize, that recalibrating look, like she kept doing things outside the expected parameters and he was updating his model of her in real time. Most people, he said again. You said that already. It bears repeating. She handed him the spare key from the hook by the door. 48 hours, she said. Then you're someone else's problem. He took the key. His fingers didn't touch hers. He was careful about that, she noticed. Careful in the specific way of someone who understood that their size and their nature made casual contact something other people had to consent to. The key sat in his palm and she released it cleanly and he closed his hand around it. Marin, he said. She looked up. You didn't ask me what I am. Alpha Shifter, she said. Valcrest Pack. I grew up on the border. I'm not an idiot. She picked up her coffee, cold now, had been cold for an hour. I also didn't ask why you were on Highway 12 alone and injured, because I figure you'll tell me if you want me to know and lie to me if you don't, and I'd rather not start off with a lie. He was quiet for a moment. I was tracking a boundary breach, he said, alone because I didn't want to bring pack members into uncertain territory. Injured because whoever made the breach was waiting for me. She turned that over. Ambush. Yes. And the people looking for you on the road, are they yours or theirs? A beat. I'm not certain, he said, with the careful flatness of a man who found that uncertainty deeply unacceptable. Marin finished the cold coffee, set the mug in the sink, guest room's the second door on the left. There's ibuprofen in the medicine cabinet. It won't do much for you, but take it anyway. She went back to the animals, who required what she could actually give them, and spent the next 3 hours not thinking about the fact that the most powerful alpha in the state of Montana was sleeping on her folding cot under a quilt her grandmother had made. And that his enemies didn't know where he was, and that for 48 hours she was the only person who did. Gerald the coyote bumped his blind head against her shin while she cleaned his kennel. Don't, she told him. He sneezed. She finished the rounds. She found him in the kitchen at 5:30. Not her kitchen. She meant the rescue's small break room kitchen, the one with the coffee maker that took 3 attempts and the refrigerator with the note on it that said Marin's labeled items, hands off in her handwriting. He was standing at the counter in the borrowed flannel, reading the label on a coffee can with the focused attention of a man who had decided this was a solvable problem and was solving it. You have to hit the side, she said from the doorway. The button sticks. He hit the side. The coffee maker gurgled to life. She came in, pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet, and they stood in the small kitchen in the 5:30 dark while the coffee brewed, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence, which was strange. Marin was comfortable with silence. She worked with animals. Silence was the baseline, but silence with a person was different, usually charged with the effort of not speaking. This wasn't that. "How are the ribs?" she asked. "Better. Better like you can breathe without it catching, or better like you've decided to perform wellness for my benefit?" He looked at her sideways. "The first one." "Good." She poured the coffee, handed him a mug. "I need to do your tape this morning." The wrap loosened overnight. He sat in the chair at the break room table, her usual chair as it happened, the one positioned to see both the door and the window, the one she'd chosen years ago for the same reason she suspected he had chosen it now. She noticed this. She did not comment on it. She pulled the first aid kit from the cabinet and stood in front of him and unwound the old tape with the efficient impersonality of someone who dealt with bodies clinically. Because that was what she was doing. That was all she was doing. The bruising along his ribcage had gone from black to the greenish yellow of accelerated healing. She'd seen it in animals, the speed of it. But on a person, on a man's skin in the gray pre-dawn light, it was something else entirely. 5 years ago, he said. She paused. "You asked last night why I was alone on the highway." He was looking at the wall. "I told you about the breach." That was true. The fuller answer is that I've been running boundary patrols alone for 5 years because my brother used to do them with me, and he's dead. She continued rewrapping, steady, even pressure. "What happened?" she asked. "Decision I made. Wrong one." His jaw was tight. "I sent him to the south boundary. I thought the threat was contained. It wasn't. You couldn't have known. I should have known. It was my job to know." He said it without self-pity, which was worse than if he had. The tone of a verdict that had been delivered, accepted, and built into the foundation of everything since. "So I run them alone now. Because if I'm wrong again, I'm the only one who pays for it." Marin smoothed the last strip of tape. She stepped back and looked at her work, not at him. "That's very logical," she said. "Yes, it's also the kind of logic that gets you ambushed alone on a highway with 2 cracked ribs and no backup." A pause. "Yes," he said again, differently. She put the tape back in the kit. Outside, the first bird had started, a meadowlark, early, the sound impossibly clean in the cold air. "I lost someone too," she said. "Not the same. She wasn't family. She was the woman who ran this place before me." Dr. Agnes Holt. "She hired me when I was 19 and had no credentials and a refugee's worth of stubbornness." She closed the kit. "She died 2 years ago and left me the rescue in her will, which I didn't know she was going to do, and I've been running it alone since because it felt wrong to ask anyone else to care about it the way she did." She turned around. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him yet, not the calculating assessment, not the careful composure. Something quieter. "That's also very logical," he said. "I know." She almost smiled. "It's also lonely." The meadowlark sang. The coffee maker ticked as it cooled. "I have to feed the foxes," she said. She left him with his coffee and his bruised ribs and whatever he was doing with the thing she'd just told him, which was more than she'd told most people, and she was not going to examine why. Gerald was waiting at his kennel door when she came in, his cloudy eyes pointed at nothing, and his tail moving anyway. She scratched his ears and he leaned into her hand, and she thought about a man sitting at a table with her grandmother's quilt creases still on his cheek, holding a coffee mug like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. 48 hours, she reminded herself. Gerald sneezed on her boot. Not helpful, she told him. He fixed the latch on Kennel 7. She came back from the afternoon supply run to find him in the recovery barn. The bad kennel door disassembled on the floor. A set of tools she hadn't known she owned, spread on the workbench, with the precision of someone who had decided a problem existed and resolved to eliminate it. He was on one knee, ribs. She noted automatically. He was favoring the left side, which was correct, and he was fitting the new mechanism into the doorframe with the focused patience of a man who did everything at the same temperature, high stakes or low. "I was going to do that," she said. "It's done now." She set down the supply boxes. "Did you find the tools in the shed?" "Yes. You have a good set, better than the shed suggests." Agnes believed in good tools. She came to look at the latch. It was better than what had been there, cleaner mechanism, no play in it. She said cheap tools were false economy, and anyone who disagreed had never been 3 hours into a surgery with a failing instrument. She was right. She usually was. Marin tested the latch. Smooth, solid. "Thank you." He stood. She watched him manage the movement, the slight adjustment for the ribs, the way he had learned in 2 days how to compensate without showing it. "The leg?" she asked. "Functional. That still means cracked." "Functionally cracked," he said, and something in his voice was almost dry, almost warm, the temperature of a man who had once known how to be light and was finding the old muscle memory. She showed him the animals that afternoon. Not out of obligation, he followed her into the recovery room while she did the 4 o'clock checks, and she found herself talking through each case the way she did when she was alone, the running commentary that was half medical assessment and half conversation with creatures that couldn't answer back. The hawk, a red tail she'd named nothing, because naming them made the losses harder, had graduated to a larger perch box. She showed Draven the wing extension, the improved grip strength, the specific way the bird held itself that indicated it had decided it was going to be fine. 4 more weeks, she said. Then soft release. She'll come back twice, maybe 3 times, and then she won't. "You prefer that," he said, "when they don't come back." She looked at him. "It means they're where they're supposed to be," she said carefully. "Yes," he said, "but you still prefer it. The not coming back. It means the release worked. It means you did it right." He was watching the hawk, not her. You measure success by absence. The accuracy of that landed somewhere she hadn't expected. "You do that with people too," he said, still watching the hawk. "I'm not. You're very good at making people comfortable enough to stay," he said, "and very careful not to need them to." The recovery room was small and warm and smelled of cedar chips and antiseptic, and she was extremely aware of how close he was standing. 48 hours was your number, she said. Not mine. He turned to look at her. The amber eyes in the barn light were very direct. "I know," he said. Marin went back to the hawk's vitals because that was the professional thing to do, and she wrote the numbers on the chart with her usual precision. And she did not look at him again until she was done and had recovered the full use of her common sense. That evening his phone rang 3 times in 20 minutes. She heard his voice from the guest room, controlled, brief, the register of a man conducting a war while pretending to have a conversation. When he came out, he stood at the kitchen window looking at the dark hills with his arms crossed and the particular stillness of someone carrying a weight they had stopped expecting help with. She put a plate on the counter. Pasta, simple, the thing she made when she was tired. He looked at it. "You didn't ask if I wanted dinner," he said. "You've been on the phone for an hour," she said. "You didn't eat lunch. The plate is there. Whether you want it is your business." He sat down and ate. She sat across from him and ate too, and they didn't talk. And outside the Montana dark was pressing against the windows, and the rescue was quiet and warm, and at some point between the first forkful and the last she registered that this, 2 people at a table, food going cold, comfortable silence, was the most natural thing that had happened to her in 2 years. That was when she understood she was in trouble. She washed the dishes, he dried them. She did not comment on this development. "The 48 hours is up tomorrow morning," she said. "Yes," he said. She handed him the last dish. "Okay," she said. Neither of them said anything else. She went to bed. She stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the rescue settle into its nighttime sounds, the foxes, the hawk, old Gerald moving in his kennel, and underneath all of it, from the second door down the hall, the quiet of a man who was still there. He didn't leave at 48 hours. She was in the intake bay at 7 in the morning when he came in with 2 cups of coffee, made correctly, she noticed, he'd been paying attention, and set one on the workbench beside her without asking. "The breach," he said. "I need to confirm whether it's been closed or whether whoever made it is still operating on the eastern boundary." Marin looked at her coffee. Then, at him. "And you can't do that from anywhere else. I need to be close to the boundary to read the territory signs. The eastern boundary runs along the Ashford Ridge. The Ashford Ridge was 4 miles from the rescue." "How long?" she asked. 3 days. Possibly 4. She picked up the coffee. "You're going to need to be more useful around here. Define useful." She handed him the intake chart for the morning. "The raccoon in Bay 3 needs a bandage change. He bites. Don't let him." Draven looked at the chart, then at Bay 3, where the raccoon was already expressing opinions about the morning. "You want me to. I have a hawk, 2 new fox kits that came in overnight, and Gerald's eye drops. I need the raccoon done." She was already moving. "Gloves are on the left." She heard him, 40 minutes later, having a low and remarkably serious conversation with the raccoon. Not baby talk, actual conversation. The tone of someone laying out a reasonable position and expecting it to be considered. She pressed her lips together and kept her eyes on the fox kit in her hands. The bandage got changed. The raccoon did not bite him. She didn't comment on this either. The days developed their own rhythm, the way days did when the same people moved through the same space long enough. He was up before her. She learned this on the second morning when she found the coffee already made and the kennel runs already checked, a task she hadn't asked him to do and hadn't expected him to figure out. She didn't thank him. He didn't seem to need thanks. He had the self-possession of someone who did things because they made sense, not because they were waiting to be noticed. He was on a call in the break room on Wednesday afternoon when High Chancellor Silas Morrow's name appeared on the screen, and he let it ring out. She wasn't trying to see she'd come in for the supply kit, and the name was just there, on the screen between them. She didn't ask. That evening, after the rounds, he was at the workbench repairing the hinge on Kennel 3, and she sat on the old stool nearby doing the week's intake paperwork, and the barn was warm and the light was low, and she heard herself say, "Who's Silas Morrow?" He kept working the hinge. "My High Chancellor. He's been with me 12 years. He called 4 times today." "I know. You're not answering. I know that too." A pause, screwdriver steady. "He'll want to manage the situation. That's what Silas does. He identifies threats to the pack's stability and manages them. And you're the threat right now." He looked up. "You're the threat." She held his gaze. "Because you're here. Because I'm here and not where I'm supposed to be, and he'll have worked out by now that someone is sheltering me, and he'll want to know who before I tell him first." He set the screwdriver down. "Silas is not a bad man. He loves the pack. He loved me before he decided I needed managing, and those things are still both true. But he will make you very small," Draven said, simply and without drama. "Efficiently, legally. With your best interests cited as the reason." He picked the screwdriver back up. "I wanted you to know that before he finds you, so it doesn't land like a surprise." Marin was quiet for a moment. "How long before he finds me?" she asked. 2 days. Maybe 3. She looked at her paperwork. Gerald wandered into the barn from somewhere he wasn't supposed to be and bumped into the stool leg and sneezed, and she reached down and steadied him without looking. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he repeated carefully. "That's all? What else is there?" She went back to the intake form. "You warned me. I heard you. Now I know." She looked up. "Finished the hinge." He finished the hinge, but when she looked up 20 minutes later, he was watching her with an expression she was starting to be able to read, that stripped-back look, the one underneath all the Alpha King machinery, the one that belonged to a man who had spent 5 years making sure no one could matter to him and was currently furious at how badly that was failing. She looked back down at her paperwork. Her hand was very steady on the pen. The power went out on Thursday night. Montana in March had opinions about infrastructure, and the rescue's generator was 12 years old and had been threatening retirement since autumn. Marin was in the recovery room doing the last check when the lights cut, and the backup system groaned on with the bare minimum: heat lamps for the animals, nothing else. She navigated by memory and phone flashlight, checked each kennel, confirmed everyone was stable, and was heading back through the barn when she nearly walked into Draven coming the other direction with a high-powered flashlight and the expression of a man who had assessed the situation and was handling it. "Animals?" he asked. "All fine. Heat lamps are on." She turned off her phone light. His flashlight was better. "Generator's overloaded. I need to get to the breaker box and pull the non-essential circuits." "Where is it?" "Outside. East wall." They went together because the flashlight was his, which she told herself was the only reason. The March night was below freezing, the kind of cold that had intentions, and she was in the barn jacket she kept on the hook. Not warm enough. She knew it the moment the air hit her. The breaker box was a two-person job in this light. She held the flashlight while he held the panel door open, and she worked through the circuits from memory. Non-essential, non-essential, essential, non-essential, while her fingers went numb in the cold and her breath made small clouds between them. "Third from the left," she said. "That one's essential. Leave it." "This one?" "No, one left of that." His hand was close to hers on the panel, navigating by her direction, and the cold had contracted the space between them in the way cold did, two people gravitating toward the nearest warmth without deciding to. She pulled the last non-essential circuit. The generator sound evened out. "That should hold it," she said. Neither of them moved immediately. The Montana dark was complete out here, away from the ambient light of Ashford, and the stars were the kind you only saw this far from a city. Crowded. Specific. Showing off. She was aware of the warmth coming off him, the solid fact of him in the dark, and she was also aware that she had been aware of it for 3 days and had been professional about it and was finding that position increasingly difficult to maintain. "Marin," he said. "Don't," she said. A pause. "I haven't said anything. You were going to say something. How do you know what I was going to say?" She looked up at him. In the dark, his face was mostly shadow, and the amber of his eyes, and the thing she'd been careful not to think about was right there at the surface, exactly where she didn't want it. "Because I've been paying attention," she said, "the same way you have. And one of us needs to be sensible about what that means. I'm aware of what it means. Are you? Because I'm not a political option for you. I'm not ranked. I'm not PAC. I'm a wildlife medic in Ashford, Montana, who fixed your ribs with medical tape, and you've been here 6 days. She kept her voice level. "I know what this feels like. I also know what it is." "What is it?" he asked, very quiet. The generator hummed. An owl called from the tree line. "Proximity," she said. "Circumstances. 2 people in a small space being kind to each other, because it's been a hard few years and this is warm." She stepped back. Not far, there wasn't far to go in the dark. It doesn't have to be more than that. He was silent for a moment. "You're doing it again," he said. "What?" "Measuring success by absence." His voice was low and even, deciding it's better to leave before you're asked to. The words landed with a precision that made her breath catch, a sharp sensation just under her sternum, nothing like anything she had a clean clinical word for. She didn't answer. She went back inside. She lay in her bed for a long time, listening to the rescue breathe around her, and she did not think about the dark or the cold or the amber eyes 2 doors down the hall, and she was mostly successful. Mostly. He arrived on Friday morning in a black SUV that was too clean for the Ashford dirt roads, which told her everything she needed to know about how he felt about Ashford. Marin was in the intake bay when she heard the car, and she was at the door when Silas Morrow stepped out. 60s, silver-haired, a coat that cost more than her monthly supply budget. He looked at the rescue with the brief, efficient assessment of a man cataloging a situation, and then he looked at her, and his expression settled into something that was almost kind. Almost. "Miss Cole," he said, "I apologize for arriving unannounced. You're not the first person to do that this week." She stepped back from the door. "Come in." He came in. He looked at the recovery room, the workbench with the repaired hinges, the 2 coffee mugs on the break room counter. His gaze moved through the space the way an accountant moved through a ledger. "He's on the Eastern Ridge," she said, before he could ask. "He'll be back by noon. You've been accommodating," Morrow said. "He needed medical attention and a safe location. I provided them." She sat on the workbench stool. "Is there something specific you want to say to me, Chancellor, or are we going to do this the long way around?" He studied her. She held it steadily. "You're not what I expected," he said. "People keep saying that." A small pause. Something shifted in his expression, a minute recalibration. "The king cannot afford distractions, Miss Cole. I say this without malice toward you. He has obligations, to the pack, to the alliances we've built, to the stability of Valcrest. What happens here, in this, a brief glance around, space, cannot follow him back. Did he send you to say that? He doesn't know I'm here. Then you're telling me what he should want instead of what he does want." She kept her voice even. "That's a different thing, Chancellor." Morrow was quiet for a moment. Something worked in his face, not anger, more complicated than anger. "He had a brother," Morrow said. "Marcus. He was 24 years old and he believed in Draven completely, the way younger brothers sometimes do. When he died, something in Draven," he paused. "Draven closed the account. Everything that was not duty, not pack, not obligation. He closed it and has governed from behind that closure for 5 years, and the pack has been stable and strong, and he has been," the word seemed to cost him, diminishing, slowly, like a fire that has enough fuel to keep burning, but not enough air. Marin was very still. "I have watched him diminish for 5 years, Morrow said, and told myself it was appropriate, that a king without sentiment was a stronger king." He looked at the coffee mugs again. "I came here to remove you from the equation. And now?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "Now I'm not certain the equation needs what I thought it needed." He straightened his coat. "But I want you to understand what you'd be walking into. The court, the expectations. The people who will look at your background and find it inadequate." He said it plainly, without cruelty, which made it worse. "I have not made my peace with this. I want to be honest about that." "I appreciate the honesty," she said. He nodded once. He went back outside and sat in the clean black SUV and waited. Draven came back at 11:30. She watched from the window as he saw the car and stopped. Watched the calculation cross his face. Watched him look toward the rescue, and she stepped back from the window because she didn't want him to see her watching. She heard them outside for 40 minutes. Low voices, not raised. The conversation of 2 people who had said hard things to each other before and had learned not to waste volume on it. When Draven came in, his face was composed and his eyes were tired. "He told you he was coming to remove you," he said. "Yes." "He didn't." "No." She turned from the window. "He said he hadn't made his peace with it. I said I appreciated the honesty." She looked at him. "What did he say to you?" A long pause. "He said I looked like I had enough air," Draven said quietly. She didn't ask what that meant. She already knew. She went back to the animals, and he stood in the break room doorway watching her work, and neither of them said anything, and the thing that had almost happened in the dark was still there between them, taking up space, refusing to be managed. He told her he had to go back on Saturday. Not immediately. Sunday morning, he said. The boundary breach was confirmed closed. Morrow had the pack situation in hand, and there were 3 days of decisions waiting that couldn't be made from a folding cot in Ashford, Montana. She said okay. She meant it, and she didn't mean it, and she was honest enough with herself to hold both. That Saturday had a particular quality, the knowledge of an ending making every ordinary thing too vivid. She noticed it in herself and disliked it, the way the light through the barn door looked different, the way his voice sounded when he talked to Gerald. She was a person who did not romanticize things. She had trained herself out of it the hard way, in the years between being left at 7 and figuring out at 20 that waiting for permanence was a form of self-destruction. She was, apparently, still capable of it. That was annoying. He was quiet, too. She caught him standing at the break room window twice, with the untouched coffee cooling in his hand, and the second time she walked past and said drink the coffee, and he did. And that small thing, the way he just listened to her, the absence of performance in it, was harder to manage than everything else. "The Hawk," he said in the afternoon. "She's ready. Not until next week. She's ready now. Look at the grip strength." Marin looked. He was right. She had been pushing the release date back, and she knew why, and she didn't want to have this conversation. "I'll do it Monday," she said. "You'll do it tomorrow," he said, not unkind, "before I leave. So you don't do it alone." She turned around. He was at the kennel door, watching her, and his face was open in the way it only got in the barn, away from phones and decisions and the weight of being Alpha King. "I do things alone," she said. "That's not a problem. I know it's not." He held her gaze. "I'm asking you to let me be here for this one." The barn was warm. Outside the light was going golden late, the specific Montana afternoon light that she had stopped noticing years ago and had somehow been noticing all week. She nodded. She went to bed that night, knowing he was leaving in the morning, and the rescue would be exactly as it had been before. The Hawk, the foxes, Gerald, the generator that needed replacing, and the latch on Kennel 7 that now worked. Everything the same, one folding cot empty in the guest room. She was fine. She had always been fine. She did not sleep well and did not pretend otherwise. She drove to Billings. Not impulsively. She had been awake since 2, and by 4 she had arrived at the decision through the same methodical process she applied to everything. What was the actual problem? What were the actual options? Which option was she going to regret more? The answer to the last question was unambiguous. She left Gerald with Marcus, who owed her 3 favors, and accepted the 4 a.m. call with the resignation of someone who'd learned not to ask questions. She left a note on the break room counter that said back tonight. Fox kits get the small bottles. Gerald's drops are in the cabinet. Hawk should have privacy. She drove the 3 hours to Billings with the heat on high and the radio off. The Valcrest compound was outside the city, the kind of facility that announced its own seriousness, long drive, security gate, the particular architecture of a place that existed to project authority. She stopped at the gate and said her name, and said she was there to see the Alpha King, and waited while the guard made 3 calls and came back looking at her with the expression she had been anticipating. "He's in a council session," the guard said. "I can wait," she said. She waited for 2 hours in the visitor entrance. She was fine with waiting. She had done harder things than sit in a chair and be patient. Morrow found her first. He came through the door at 8:30 with his coat and his composure, and stopped when he saw her. She watched the calculation cross his face faster than she expected, landing somewhere she also hadn't expected. "You drove 3 hours," he said. "Yes. The council session will be another hour at least. I have the time." He sat down in the chair across from her, not hovering, not managing, just sitting. After a moment he said, "He didn't sleep well." She looked at him. "I'm informing you," he said simply, "not managing you. He didn't sleep well, and he arrived this morning with a manner I haven't seen on him in 5 years, and I thought you should know. Why are you telling me this?" Morrow was quiet for a moment, because I spent 12 years protecting him from the things that could hurt him, and I failed to account for the things that could help him. He looked at his hands. "My daughter would have found you remarkable." "I keep thinking about that." She didn't answer. There wasn't an answer that fit. When Draven came through the door an hour later and stopped at the sight of her, the expression on his face was the unguarded one, the barn version. No machinery, no composure maintained for effect, just the raw, startled fact of a man who had not expected this and was not prepared for how much it affected him. She stood up. "The hawk," she said. "She flew clean this morning. The release was good." He crossed the room. He stopped 2 feet from her, which was the distance he always maintained, the careful distance of someone who understood his own effect, and then he closed it, and his hand came up to her face the way it had the first time, deliberate and asking, and she let herself lean into it the way she hadn't before. "You drove 3 hours, he said. "You said I measure success by absence," she said. "I'm trying something different." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else, and he kissed her with the full, focused deliberateness of a man who had decided and was not leaving room for uncertainty, and she kissed him back with both hands in the front of his jacket. Which was probably inappropriate for the Valcrest visitor entrance, but Morrow had very discreetly left the room, so he told her about Marcus that night, not the broad facts she already had, the south boundary, the wrong call, the 5 years of consequences, the specific details he had never said to anyone, the argument they'd had the morning before, something small and stupid about a hunting rotation, the kind of argument that existed specifically to torture people who lost someone before they could resolve it, the way Marcus had laughed before he went, because Marcus was 24 and believed in Draven completely and had no reason to imagine the day going badly. She listened without filling it. That was what he needed, and she knew it. They were in his office. She'd been given the guest suite, which was approximately 4 times larger than her cabin. A fact she'd addressed by locating the smallest lamp and making that corner habitable, and he was at the window with a glass of water, and she was in the chair that was positioned to see both the door and the window, which he'd noticed and not commented on. "Morrow told you," he said. "He told me what he knew. You told me the rest." "I haven't told anyone the rest." "I know." She held her mug. "You've been carrying the version that makes sense to other people. The clean version." He turned from the window. "And the version I told you? The version you told me is the one where you're still a person and not a verdict." She met his eyes. "Those are different things. You've been living in the verdict." He was quiet for a long moment. "Silas wants a formal arrangement," he said. "Between us. He's already rearranging his position on it. Which is, he doesn't do that. Rearrange. A pause. He drafted a preliminary structure. It would take time. There are protocols, introductions to the court, expectations I need to be honest with you about. Are you asking me? I'm telling you what's in front of us before I ask you," he said, "because you deserve to know what you're walking into." Not the managed version. She thought about the gate guard's expression, the visitor entrance, the coat that cost more than her supply budget. "I'm going to keep the rescue," she said, obviously. "And Gerald." "I wouldn't, yes. Gerald comes with you, and I'm not performing anything for anyone. Not rank, not status, not whatever the court expects a Luna to be. I'm a wildlife medic from Ashford." "I know what you are," he said quietly. "That's the point." She set down the mug. "Then ask me," she said. He crossed the room and took her hand, the cracked knuckles, the antiseptic-stained fingers, the hand she'd always had the urge to hide, and held it with the careful deliberateness of someone who had found the thing they'd stopped believing they deserved and was not going to handle it carelessly. "Stay," he said. "Yes," she said. Outside, Valcrest settled into its nighttime sounds, the compound, the territory, the pack she was going to have to learn the way she'd learned every other space she'd been given. Detail by detail. Floor by floor. She was good at that. The introduction happened on a Thursday. Marin stood at the entrance to the main hall and watched 60 pack members rearrange their expectations in real time, and she found to her own mild surprise that she was not particularly afraid. She had stood in an intake bay with an unknown wolf. She had faced Silas Morrow at 4 a.m. She had driven 3 hours on a decision she made at 2 a.m. and hadn't regretted it. The court could manage. Draven was beside her, not in front, not shielding. Beside, she had told him the night before that she needed to stand in it herself, and he had understood immediately, which was one of the things she was still getting used to, the way he understood things without requiring them to be explained twice. The hall had the specific quality of a room full of people making very quick assessments. She let them. She stood straight in the clothes she'd bought in Billings. Not a dress, she'd been clear about that, and she met eyes when people met hers, and she didn't perform anything. An older woman near the front looked at her for a long moment. Silver-haired, the particular gravity of someone who had been in a room like this many times before. She said nothing, but she nodded once, a small, deliberate dip of the chin, and turned back to the front. Marin filed it away. Morrow stood at the far edge of the room, composed and still. She caught his eye once. He gave her the same nod, fractionally the way he did everything. The formal introduction was brief. Draven spoke in the register she recognized as his public voice, clean and authoritative, and she noted the exact moment he shifted. A small thing. Something in the cadence when he talked about the rescue. About the hawk. He hadn't told her he was going to include that, and she was going to address that later, but she couldn't deny the effect. She watched the hall's posture shift. You couldn't manufacture that. He knew it. He was using it, and it was still true. After a young pack member, 19, maybe 20, came to stand in front of her with the energy of someone who had been dared to do something and had decided to do it on their own terms. "You really have a blind coyote?" she said. "Gerald," Marin said. "He's 11. He bites if you come in too fast. I want to see him. Come to Ashford." She meant it. Mornings are better. "Bring boots." The girl grinned and went back to her friends, and Marin turned to find Draven watching from across the room with the Barn expression. The unguarded one. The one she was apparently going to see for the rest of her life. And the thing in her chest that had started in a recovery room in Ashford felt very settled and very sure. Morrow appeared at her elbow. "The elder near the front," he said quietly. "Celeste, she was the first to formally welcome Marcus when he came of age." A pause. "She nodded at you. I noticed. It means something. I suspected it did." She looked at him. "Thank you for what you said in the visitor entrance." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm still working on it," he said. "My position." "I know." She turned back to the hall. "Me too." Gerald met him at the kennel door. He did this every morning now, the blind coyote tracking Draven's particular footstep pattern with the accuracy of an animal that had decided smell and sound were more reliable than sight, and had adjusted accordingly. He bumped his head against Draven's knee and sneezed and walked away with the comprehensive self-satisfaction of someone who had performed the required greeting. "He likes you," Marin said from the workbench. "He tolerates me." For Gerald, those are the same thing. It was April, and the Montana morning was finally warming, the specific slow warmth of high-altitude spring, not sudden, not performative, just a gradual shift in what the air was willing to do. The rescue was loud in the mornings now, 2 new red tails, a young mule deer that wasn't going to make it but was going to be comfortable, and a fox kit who had been returned by his release site 3 times and had apparently decided the rescue was home. She'd named him. That was new. She'd named him Remy and was not examining the implications. Draven came to the rescue twice a week, sometimes 3 times. He didn't announce it. He showed up, put on the work jacket she'd found him, did what needed doing. He had learned the morning routine with the same focused efficiency he applied to everything, and the animals had adjusted, and Marcus, the volunteer, had stopped being wide-eyed about it 3 weeks ago, which she considered a meaningful milestone. The hawk had come back once. She'd landed on the intake bay roof on a Tuesday morning and stayed for 4 hours and left, and Marin had stood in the yard and watched her go and felt the specific rightness of it, the proof of a thing done correctly. Draven had been there. He hadn't said anything. He'd put his hand on her shoulder and she'd leaned into it, and that was all. And it was enough. Morrow was coming to the rescue next week. His idea, he'd asked to see the facility, which she suspected was partly genuine curiosity and partly his particular form of doing the work he'd said he was doing. She'd said yes, and meant it. The elder Celeste had sent a letter. Formal, old-fashioned handwriting, 3 paragraphs about the history of Valcrest Lunas, and a 4th that said simply, "You are not what any of us expected." In my experience, that is the right beginning. She'd put it on the break room wall next to Agnes Holt's old certification. "The deer," Draven said, coming in from the back kennel. "She ate this morning." "I know." Marin looked up from the intake form. "I checked at 6. Remy tried to steal her breakfast. Remy steals everything. He's not apologetic about it. I like him. You would." She went back to the form. "You both make every space feel smaller than it was." He was quiet for a moment, and then he made the sound that was almost a laugh, warm and low, and she felt it settle in her chest the way it always did, not dramatically, not like a revelation, just like something that was exactly where it was supposed to be. She finished the intake form. He poured the coffee, correctly, always correctly now. Outside, April was doing what it did, slow and sure and not asking permission from anyone. The hills above Ashford were going green at the edges. The rescue was loud and warm and full of animals that had been broken and were getting better, and Marin sat in her usual chair, the good one, the one by the window, and accepted the mug he put in her hands and looked out at the morning. She had measured success by absence for 23 years. She was done with that. Remy stole Gerald's breakfast again. Gerald sneezed. Somewhere on the Ashford Ridge, the pack boundary held. She stayed.